Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy, and I've been wondering, is Armand truly just a toxic menace, or is he completely misunderstood? If you'd like to jump to specific sections, I'm going to discuss Louis and Armand and Lestat's relationship, Claudia and Armand and Daniel, and of course, Armand and Marius. If you haven't seen the show or read the book, then this deep dive will contain spoilers. So please take this as your spoiler warning. So with that said, let's get into the video. Armand. What are we going to do about Armand? He initially comes across as harmless, small and quite frail, but he is immensely powerful because of his age. He also has incredible self-restraint. We get a glimpse of his power, for example, the restaurant scene with the coven in Paris in the 1940s, and at their flat in San Francisco in 1973, where he tortures Daniel for days and wiped his memory, and then wipes Louis's memory just a few days later. But I don't believe we've seen even half of his true power just yet. Can we believe his version of his time with Lestat? Does he see Louis as a replacement for Marius? Is that what he's been looking for all of these years, even with Lestat? Does he just want a master to serve? Or does he love being in control? So the purpose of this video is to discuss whether Armand is simply toxic or entirely misunderstood. And I can't think of a better sample to examine first than his relationship with Louis, as depicted in seasons 1 and 2 of Interview with the Vampire. So let's start with San Francisco, 1973. Armand and Louis launch into a vicious fight, not with fists, but with words. Once it's over, and Louis has hurt himself by walking into the sun, he becomes completely dependent on Armand. He is weak and in pain, and whilst Armand is distracted, torturing Daniel in the other room, he shouts to Armand for help. Armand, put me in my coffin. It struck me on my second, or maybe even my third watch, that Louis is actually saying the exact words that Lestat cries to him in 1940. After Louis has, well, we know what Louis did. These cries are precisely the same type of pleas for help, and they both happen right after Louis has hurt someone, either Lestat or himself. And I have to say, I've noticed a little bit of a pattern that episode 5 of each season so far of Interview with the Vampire, Louis gets really hurt. Now, in season 1, Lestat does it, and in season 2, he does it to himself. I can only imagine what's going to happen in episode 5 of the Vampire Lestat. So these cries for help both happen after they have been hurt. And in this case, Louis does receive the help he needs. Armand does help him. But the more I watch the fight, the more it disturbs me. Like, Louis and Lestat's big fight was visually awful, truly. It was harrowing. But in both Louis and Lestat's versions, we do hear Lestat crying, "Stop! I don't want to fight like this." And, "I'm trying to restrain myself, Louis." But of course, he takes it way beyond in the end. But the fight between Louis and Armand is also vicious. Armand brings up Louis's brother, his sister, and his mother, while Louis mocks Armand and calls his life with him boring, calls him boring. Suffocation by the world's softest, beigest pillow. Ouch. And luckily, we get to hear the entire 9-minute fight in its entirety, just as it happened, thanks to Daniel's recording. It's not the perspective of either party. It's an objective snapshot into their lives at that point in time. Armand is not helpless. He goes toe-to-toe with Louis. And it's the same cutting side of Louis that we get in both fights if Lestat's version of the play is to be believed. Louis pushes and pushes, and Armand finally breaks and goes for Louis's neck. But Armand's breaking isn't a physical break, it's a verbal break. And Armand knew that bringing up Claudia in that way would be the thing to say that would really hurt Louis in that moment. She never loved you. Not like he did. Not like I have. And Louis just says, I know. He said the thing that he knew would destroy Louis, and it does. Louis completely disassociates and starts to hear Claudia before he walks out into the sun to try to join her, or at least just try to end things. Whereas Lestat did the thing that would destroy Louis, and it did. He was a broken thing afterward. It took many weeks for the physical wounds to heal, but he is still suffering the consequences of that night today. On a side note, Louis says to Armand, "Are you going to cut my hands off?" I think he must be referring to the fact that Armand cuts off Nicky's hands. And we get a shot of Nicholas in the extended teaser trailer of the Vampire Lestat, and he has just one hand. And I have to wonder, did Armand tell Louis that he did this awful thing? And if so, how did he frame that? Or did Lestat tell Louis at some point in their 30-year relationship? And if he did, does this mean that Lestat actually let on a lot more about his relationship with Nicholas than Louis expressed in his interview with Daniel? What do you think? So this fight really disturbs me because they both go for the neck, so to speak. Now, as I've gotten older, I've realised just how lucky I am to have grown up in a home with no shouting, no insults or screaming matches. I know it's really rare, and I know I'm incredibly blessed. I really do know that. So I guess this might be why I just can't understand why either would dig so deeply to destroy the other. I think I've featured this fight in this segment because ultimately Armand succeeded in destroying Louis here. And I just can't figure out his motive for doing that. And then immediately after, nursing him back to health. Now, don't get me wrong, I get the cycle of abuse. And I know that it comes in many, many forms. But Armand then goes on to ask Louis if he has crawled even an inch forward since his part in Claudia's demise. I think he must know that he can never be fully absolved of what he did. But still, he stays, he hurts, and gets hurt. Then nurses, and cleans up, and resents. What's the deal, Armand? And secondly, I'd like to discuss the control that Armand exerts over Louis. There's the pages of Claudia's diary that Louis has to ask Armand to see. And Armand doesn't say yes, of course. Louis has to bargain with him before he agrees. Then there are small things, like Armand taking the lead on the art deals for their home. Of the two of them, wasn't Louis the visual artist? But it's Armand that takes the lead. And finally, there's the fact that there is not one personal effect in their home whilst they live together. We know that Louis has kept things from his human life, the photo of Grace, for example. And it's so striking, the first time that we see what is now Louis' home, the same penthouse in Dubai, has so much colour now. And he proudly displays the portrait of Paul and beautifully frames Claudia's dress. Was Armand controlling even the decor of their home? If so, why? Was it to portray a certain image to their guests and to their staff? We know Armand had a complex about being turned so young. We also know that his maker Marius exposed him to luxuries that he had never experienced before. Is Armand trying to manipulate and control the image of their home and his relationship into something that it just isn't? You know, I'd love to get into absolutely every detail of their relationship, but like every other section of this episode, a true deep dive would require a completely standalone video. But don't worry, a deep dive of their relationship is definitely on my list. But I'd love to hear what you think about the control, the manipulation, or have I got it completely wrong? Let me know what you think. Okay, so this section is going to have to be broken up into two mini sections, Lestat and Dreamstat, because I've been pondering the effects of both on Armand and his behaviour. We'll start with Lestat. Now, I'm not going to go into every detail of their entire relationship. Again, that would need its own video, and I think it deserves its own video as well. But of course, in the show, we've only heard Armand's side of his time with Lestat so far. Their story in the novel is not quite as simple, and Armand definitely left a lot of key information out in his account to Daniel. When Lestat first lays eyes on Armand in the Vampire Lestat, after the Paris Coven has taken Nicky, and he and Gabrielle have taken refuge in a church, Lestat describes Armand like this: "And as I stared past her at the open doorway, I saw a small figure appear. Compact it was. The figure of a young boy, not a man. I ached for it to be Nicholas, but I knew immediately that it was not. It was smaller than Nicholas, though rather heavier in build. He had a head of curly hair. He was beautiful, indescribably beautiful. With the coven close by, Armand displays his power in front of Lestat and Gabrielle in that church by moving vampire fast. They surprise him by moving just as quickly as he does. And as they do this, Armand exposes himself. He was clearly startled when he saw us at his side. He gave me a glimpse of his great weakness, pride. He was humiliated that we had crept up on him, moving so lightly and managing at the same time to conceal our thoughts. But worse was to come. When he realized that I had perceived this, it was revealed for a split second. He was doubly enraged. I found it so interesting when I read this, as I had picked up from the show that Armand seemed to try so hard to cultivate a very curated and controlled image of himself. But this chapter in particular really seems to illustrate that Lestat seemed to see straight through Armand from the very beginning. In the show, Armand has been shown to edit evidence that shines a light on his not-so-perfect actions. Actions that fall short of the curated persona he presents. The ancient covenant leader, the cultured millionaire, the loving harmless partner. The glaring example of this is, of course, him slicing pages out of Claudia's diaries. He even takes charge of those pages, or maybe possession is the better word. Louis even had to ask to see them. Lestat even tells a very different version of their first conflict, one that differs greatly from the version that Armand gives to Daniel in Season 2, Episode 3. In fact, it's the exact opposite of Armand's telling, where he was the more powerful of the two vampires. Lestat says, "He was attempting to lift me and throw me through the door, but I fought him. I held him, not off balance as one might to a heavy mortal, but straight up in the air. Just as I suspected, he went over in a somersault, crashing into the wall." Was Armand trying to save face by lying to Daniel, and ultimately to himself? Did he believe that Lestat would never contradict his version of the event? Because he had gotten away with lying about saving Louis in the trial. Had he lied to himself so many times that it actually felt like the truth to him now? Or was he simply manipulating Daniel, Louis, and the future readers of Daniel's book? That really is something I've been thinking about lately, and I really hope we at least get to hear Lestat's version of their first encounter in the Vampire Lestat. And if we do, I'd love for Daniel to get to the truth with Armand too. As a side note, Armand loved Marius. He was truly devoted to his master, his maker. But Marius never told Armand about those who must be kept, and the true history of their species. When Lestat mentioned that he has Akasha's blood in him in Season 2, Episode 8, Armand looks on blankly, and Lestat says he doesn't know. I honestly can't wait to find out how Armand reacts to Lestat's revelations. Okay, so let's talk about Dreamstat. Armand is haunted by Lestat. Even with this new love interest, the first in over 100 years, Lestat still looms enormously in his life. Louis has Lestat in the back of his mind constantly during his initial courtship with Armand. They could be sat having a lovely conversation, and there he is, right in the forefront of Louis' thoughts. Dreamstat, who let's not forget is entirely Louis' conjuring, his subconscious thoughts and feelings personified. So when in Season 2, Episode 3, Dreamstat sings, "You little whore." No, I'm not going to subject you to my singing. But when Dreamstat sings, "You little whore," you only want him because you're feeling blue. Or when Dreamstat scoffs so loudly at the end of Armand's heartbreaking tale in the Louvre in Season 2, Episode 4. Or just before that, when Armand comes to serenade Louis at his window. Dreamstat laughs uncontrollably at this.
Is
Romeo!
the sun?
Barely Balthazar.
Or when Louis tells Armand that he loves him, and Armand says it back, Dreamstat mocks him mercilessly, albeit hilarious. Also Season 2, Episode 4. This is all Louis. These are all his thoughts. This is all his subconscious bleeding through. In the same episode, Armand says to Daniel, "I was not aware he was as present as he was." As cool as you like. But you can tell that Louis' description of Dreamstat really does get to him, although he masks it well. Armand is frequently comparing his relationship with Louis to Louis with Lestat. They even go 23 years without uttering his name in their home. In season 2, episode 3, Armand asks Louis, "Did he break you, Louis? Are you broken?" Louis responds, "No, but I carry him. I don't know if I can." "You will. I did. You and him? A century or so ago? Yesterday? What is time to a vampire?" These few lines are so revelatory to me. We have to remember that this scene comes directly after Armand was about to take Louis out in the sewer, at the behest of the coven. Or did he know the entire time that he was not going to take him out? As the walk they took led straight back to Louis's flat. Did he just want to scare Louis? Break him? Then be the one to put him back together? Armand is saying many things at once here. He's confessing that he once loved Lestat, sure. But he is also acknowledging the fragility of his relationship with Louis. He knows that Lestat is right between them. And in my opinion, it's not just from Louis' side. Armand has his ties to Lestat too. And with this, I believe that Armand was trying to control Louis, in the same way that Lestat tried to control him, and failed. Lestat admits that he broke Louis physically because he could not own him. But does Armand try to manipulate Louis by breaking him down here? I mean, I could be wrong. I could be reading this entirely wrong. I'd be so interested to hear what you have to say about this. So when it comes to Claudia, I believe that Armand finds it very difficult to tell the complete truth. In fact, we see him mask the truth or even outright lie to cover himself. When he and Louis are discussing Claudia's time as baby Lou with Daniel in season 2, episode 4, Armand, who was well aware of Claudia's disdain for the role she had been given, says this: "Coven life requires a letting go of oneself. She carried her water uphill like a seasoned player. It's only because Louis is there that we get a more honest account." He contradicts him by simply saying she had issues with it. When asked how the coven took baby Lou's success, Armand masks the truth again and says, mostly with grace. But Louis says they were bitter. And as we know, he also cut out some pages of Claudia's diaries. And he admits to Daniel that in doing that, he was attempting to cover himself and his act of cowardice. But since reading the first 3 novels, I'm now of the opinion that of all vampires, Armand should really be able to empathize with Claudia. He was made young too. Okay, not as young as she was in the book or the show. And he was also made in trauma. She hated dressing up like a little girl every night and performing for the world what she desperately wanted to escape. Having to relive every painful comment she had ever received, while the mortals laughed and pointed. He didn't have to wonder or guess how she felt. She told him outright. She knew that she would be in this childlike body forever. And the fact of this was difficult at the best of times. So to throw her in a baby doll dress to perform most nights of the week as a child for her first play was just cruel. And by performance 500, yeah, she was tired. Armand calls it sabotage, but the major difference between Claudia and Armand is that he begged his maker, Marius, to change him. And I think that Claudia, outside of being a distraction to Louis, was a dark reflection of the self that Armand tries so desperately to hide from the world. Ultimately, Louis came with a child, but he wanted Louis for himself. Similar to Lestat, who took out Lily, and some might even say Paul, Armand does not want the burden of Claudia. Louis even uses this as a selling point to try to tempt him into turning Madeline, the promise that Claudia might simply just leave them. But that wasn't enough for Armand, no. He wanted her gone permanently. And the Coven's plan to destroy her was what? Ideal? Convenient? Both Lestat and Armand wanted Louis for themselves. But where Lestat knew that he needed to keep Claudia close to keep Louis happy, Armand tries and sadly succeeds in removing Claudia from the equation entirely. Did he manipulate the entire situation to get Louis to himself? We mustn't forget that he gleaned their secret the night he introduced them to the Coven. He had a long time between his uncovering and the Coven's discovery of the same fact. Is there more he could have done to prevent what happened? Is there more he did do to nudge things in the direction he wanted them to go? Things he hasn't yet confessed to, and therefore we haven't seen in the show. I'm not 100% sure, in all honesty, but what I do know is that Armand wanted Claudia gone. and he found the perfect way to do it. I found it incredibly ironic when Armand said to Claudia, "You're a manipulator, Claudia de Liancourt." He, the director of the play that would have resulted in the death of his companion, and did result in the death of his companion's daughter, Anne Fledgling. It's a bloody cheek if you ask me. I'm so glad that they made Claudia as strong and formidable as they did in the show, and both actresses played her exquisitely. But Armand and his manipulation won in the end, and he got everything he wanted, for the better part of a century. He no longer has the burden of leading a coven. He had Louis, no matter how strained it might have been at times. There were no little fledglings to take Louis' attention away from him, and he could live his best millionaire life with minimal headaches. And I have to say, with great clothes. A fantastic wardrobe, in fact. In this instance, I'm sure he's a manipulator and not misunderstood. But if you think differently, I'd love to hear why. So do let me know. Now, I will be doing a standalone video on Daniel and Armand's relationship, a mixture of the book and the show. But for now, a very high-level overview of their relationship from the books is this. Armand was obsessed with keeping and controlling Louis, but he truly became obsessed with Daniel, his one and only fledgling. Daniel of the books is pretty different to the Daniel of the show. Book Daniel never reaches the natural age that show Daniel does before he's changed. And Book Daniel is still wrecking his body with all sorts of illicit substances. After the events of Interview with the Vampire, the novel, Book Daniel is desperate to be turned. Louis won't do it, and he can't find Lestat, but he does find Armand. Armand becomes obsessed with this fascinating boy, but also refuses to turn him. It is definitely obsession, but Armand may even call it love. And Daniel eventually spirals, and Armand has to turn him to save his life. And it's not too dissimilar from the circumstances of his own turning. Unfortunately, it is the turning that in the end ends their relationship ultimately. So when it comes to the show's depiction of their relationship, where do I start? I don't have a concrete idea of where the show will take the trajectory of their relationship, but I do believe we will get a lot more clarity in the Vampire Lestat. But until then, I will paint with broad strokes. So, what do we know for sure? Their initial interactions are fraught with tension. Daniel cannot stand Armand because of the discovery that Armand manipulated his memory and tortured him. "You were going to drain me, pal." Armand has dismissed and underestimated Daniel. He refers to him as a boy, the boy, and in 1973 groups him in with Louis' so-called lowlives and unfortunates. But at the same time, Armand does respect Daniel's skills as a journalist. And of course, Armand uses Daniel in his breakup with Louis by turning him, the first vampire he's ever made. It was incredibly petty and cruel, and there will be consequences from this. But Daniel, from what I can see, is taking his new immortal life in stride. Thriving, actually. Look at those curls. But, as I've described, Daniel and Armand's relationship in the novels is quite something. Again, I'm not entirely sure of just how much we will cover in the Vampire Lestat, because there are some serious conversations that need to happen between the two of them, and I cannot wait to see them. Armand's history is tragic, truly. The tale of his life as a human from the show actually made me cry the first time I watched it. As far as he can remember, his parents named him Arun. And in what is a beautifully acted and an incredibly well-written scene, in Season 2, Episode 4, Armand talks Louis through his life in Delhi, where at some point, before the age of 15, he was sold to a ship's captain, who turned out to be a slaver. From there, he was taken to a brothel, where he lived and was put to work. He was rescued from that brothel by the person who would later become his maker, Marius de Romanus. Marius renamed Arun Amadeo and educates him. He introduces him to luxury and the finest things Italy has to offer. But sadly, in the story Armand tells Louis in the show, many awful things continued to happen to him whilst he was with Marius. Clients, so to speak, being offered out to visitors, and so on. But Amadeo was completely devoted to him. Back to the novel, Marius holds off changing Amadeo for some years, as he is just so young, but he also wants to educate him in the ways of the blood before he does. But Amadeo is impatient, and he wants to be changed now. He wants to follow his master wherever it is that he goes every night. He displays an incredibly manipulative streak even then. And in an act of juvenile petulance, Amadeo seduces an English lord, hoping that it would hurt Marius. He spends a few days with this lord, but then leaves him and returns home. But unfortunately for Amadeo, the lord becomes obsessed with him. And in an act of revenge, jealousy, and rage, the lord stabs Amadeo with a poison blade. And to save his life, Marius then turns him, long before he had planned to, and long before he had matured into a grown man. Even as a human, Armand had toxic tendencies. Marius had reasons for not doing what Armand wanted, when Armand wanted it. There was wisdom in his decision, but that wasn't good enough for Armand. No. He decided to involve someone else, use them, and then discard them. He managed and steered the situation all to hurt Marius, right up until he lost control. Yes, he finally got his wish, but at what cost? Similar to Claudia, he was condemned to the adolescent body he was turned in. I don't know which part of his story from the books we'll get in the Vampire Lestat, or if they will leave it as the version he described to Louis in the Louvre. But this event for me is definitely a tick in the toxic box for Armand, I'm afraid. Yes, he was young, but not so young to excuse this type of behaviour in my opinion. I do struggle with this one a little though, because I just cannot understand where he got this behaviour from. Did he learn it in the brothel to survive? And if so, okay, maybe we can have some empathy for him then. But then that behaviour became a skill for him. He honed that skill of manipulation over the many years that he's been alive. So, yeah, I think it's toxic. So in conclusion, my answer to the question, is Armand toxic or misunderstood, is actually, I think it's a little bit of both. But maybe not for the reason you might think. I think it's a little bit of both because I just cannot understand his motives sometimes. I can't understand why he does what he does. And I tell you what, the makers of this show knew exactly what they were doing when they cast Assad Zaman. I mean, he has a face anyone could love. So that's what makes it doubly difficult for me anyway, when Armand's actions are so deplorable, but they're done by this beautiful man. I don't know. Maybe I am leaning towards toxic. And for toxic, just restart this video. So what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I release videos every Sunday, so please hit subscribe so you never miss an update. Thanks, bye!